which means that 2023 will be the 100-year anniversary of the fire suppression mandate for the United States. And so one thing I think is going to happen is that CAL FIRE, and I know the Forest Service is already on board, I want to see them come out in 2023 and reverse that, because that's the reason why we're in the position we're in right now. Is, as Adam was talking about, we live in a place that evolved with fire. We live in a place that actually wants to burn, that is better with fire, that is healthier with fire. I was out at Adam's place the other day. I've never really understood where the bats are supposed to live. In the south, they have these really sort of flaky hemlock trees, and they're always full of bats. And all the bats I see are in barns, under barns. I was like, where are all the bats supposed to be? And I was looking at these kind of flaking off oak bark of these trees that survived. I was like, oh, that's where the bats are supposed to live. So I don't think we even really understand how important fire is to this ecology, let alone what happened. There's a great book I'd highly recommend called California's Fading Wildflowers. And probably won't use this. But they're actually, these annual grasses were moving in even faster than Europeans were moving in, and actually even faster than cattle were moving in. And so the dominant dialogue that I have understood about grazing, where it was poor grazing that overgrazed some of these perennial grasses, in many cases these south-facing slopes weren't even grasses at all. So my kind of goal to try to graze my way to perennial south-facing slopes is actually these were fork fields. These burned so frequently that they were just hillsides full of wildflowers. And now they're hillsides full of what I call grassoline. And that's not really good. So fire is when something that's carbon oxidizes really rapidly. So it needs oxygen contact. And when they're all the grasses standing up like this, think about all the surface area that each one of those strands of grass has. If nothing else than just walking around on the ground, whether it was a herd of elk or some people or some larger bunny rabbits, something was going to knock that down into soil contact. Once it makes soil contact, then it becomes biologically active, then it's touching the soil. In other places where it can stand up and just rot where it's standing. Here, it only rots if it's inside of an ungulate's belly or it's touching the ground. And it's either going to rot or it's going to oxidize. And so when I like to, there's nothing wonderful about a really, really tall dead grass. If you ever walked a little dog, like walk a dog that size through really tall grass and see how much they like it, And we have this massive grass problem. And when we finally got to Adam's place, that grass that's that tall gets knocked over, and it actually mulches itself out on the ground. Anyway, those are a few of the things in my head thinking about fire. I actually, the October fires, I had broken my back in the April of that year. And so I've been a volunteer firefighter for a few years now, and I was at that point. And I hadn't been responding because the last thing I would want is somebody with a broken back to respond. And then I'm supposed to drag this guy out of the building, and I'm just like, buddy, I can't do it, my back hurts. So I hadn't really been much of a firefighter for about 4 months at that point. But I did respond that night. That night I had to respond. And there were actually a lot more fires, I think, than people even realize. There were power lines down all over the place. I was on an electrical fire in the middle of Potter Valley with those 70-mile-an-hour winds. And so it wasn't until the next morning. I didn't sleep for 72 hours because I hadn't really put it together that it had gone over the hills. While I was fighting the fire over here, it had gone over the hills and back down within the first hour and a half over a ranch that we have on the other side. So while I had gone and responded with the volunteer firefighters at Potter Valley, my father-in-law had gone around into Redwood Valley to the ranch that we leased, but there was nothing for him to do. He couldn't even get up into the hills at that point. It was just a firestorm in all directions. And we didn't know where the cattle were at that point. So the next day, kind of like what Evan was talking about, you start getting on the phone. The Farm Bureau was really helpful. They made a special list of people who are allowed to go through the blockade into Redwood Valley. But at that point, you didn't really know what was going to happen. If I leave Potter Valley, can I get to Redwood? Can I go into Redwood Valley? Are they going to let me back into Potter Valley? What if there's a shift change? What if the highway patrolman doing the roadblock in Potter Valley changes and the other guy is more of a stickler, and now I can't get back into Potter Valley to supply water to the animals? And you think you're a sustainable farm until you realize how much you need electricity. When the pump went out, we switched over to a pump that we use for a bunch of different things. It's a fire pump. Sometimes we'll use it when we're doing irrigation projects and need to suck water out of something. And then sometimes we'll use it to pump water, kind of backfeed into our larger, usually electric system. And last time we would used it doing something irrigation-wise, we would put a little dirt in it. So then you're in this question: do you tear your pump apart in order to pump water to your water truck to then truck water to the cattle? And thinking, what happens when it's kind of like when what's his name is going to shoot Kaiser Sose? What if I miss? So what if you tear your pump apart and you can't leave the valley? They're not going to let you back in. So anyway, all these kind of questions. If you're going to have an emergency kit, it needs to be an emergency kit. Whether it's a chainsaw or anything else, if it's your daily use one, it's probably going to be broken on the day that you need it for the emergency. But then you get the same thing with anything gasoline, especially with ethanol in the fuel these days. It might be that then when you try to fire up that emergency kit generator, that emergency kit pump, the carburetor is going to be all blown out. So what we ended up deciding to do, my father-in-law and our ranch hand stayed at the ranch, and I have a red card, so I figured I would be able to get through the roadblocks. It turns out they never would give me permission to have anybody but me leave. So I went to Redwood Valley and managed to get another friend, Chris Bartow, from up here to come down to start looking for the cattle, because they survived, but every piece of feed on that whole place had disappeared. They began starving on the day that the fire happened. Even if they had been in some magical oasis, they would have started to starve. The deer do a lot better on the browse as some of those oaks burn out and fall, eating a lot of leaves, a lot of moss, a lot of lichen. When I finally did find cattle, these are range cattle. These aren't dairy cows that we bring in every day. They're used to seeing me, and then I send my dog out to go move them someplace. We have a loving relationship, but it's not like they come up to me, but they would come up to me and eating moss out of my hands. By the time I got them down the hill, it was kind of an interesting question of this horse versus ATV rancher that I think about a lot. Chris Bartow was able to just step over all the trees. I had to cut 100 trees off the road just to get around to where I was going to go. One thing that I think about, I had broken my back in an ATV accident. If I hadn't broken my back, I would have broken my back in the middle of the fire. The trees, when I was up there, the trees were still smoldering. There were branches falling down as the trees burnt out. The grass was no longer on fire because it was no longer there. But you could track the cattle that were alive, because everywhere that everywhere it turned black. So everywhere they had walked was back to that red soil. So we ended up finding, we found 25 dead cows the first day. A lot of them had fled and run into fences. So unfortunately, I don't have the ability to redraw all the property lines, but it really makes you think about what would happen if there was a fire. How would they funnel down? Are there ways that we could, rather than cross fence this way, allow them to move into maybe a safer area, because a lot of them hit those property line fences. Turns out almost all of them had to be put down regardless. They were so severely burned that their skin was starting to slough off their sides. Their teats were sloughing off, and their feet were sloughing off. And so we were able to get the vet in. At this point, I still thought I was saving animals when I was trying to get them down the hill, which was a tough thing because a lot of them didn't want to walk. But I knew that if I could get them down, then I could get them feed, I could get them to water. And they were very cooperative, actually. So get them down to the corral, and there's the vet waiting for me along with BuzzFeed, who I really didn't want to talk to, and the landowner was there and kind of yelled at them, so luckily didn't have to deal with that. But the vet starts kind of cycling, putting all of these, what are your options here, what are your options here? Are you gonna maybe try to save them? If you're gonna try to save them, we treat them, we give them painkillers. If you give them painkillers, then they're no longer, can't be slaughtered. How's your insurance? Is your insurance good enough? Are you gonna try to salvage slaughter these guys? In which case, this is how much money you might make. It's just all these, and you're thinking what's best for the cows. Luckily, we had good enough insurance that I was in a financial situation to be only thinking about what's best for the cows. And unfortunately, what was best for the cows was mostly to put them down. I'm on video, so I'm not going to talk about that part because it turns out the EPA has all sorts of opinions that are all impossible to do in that situation. We have a local composting facility that composted a blue whale. He's passionate about that, and yet talking to him, there's something called the rendering lobby that tries to push back against compost being able to be done in that situation. Which we've got to get on, because when the wolves are here, Covelo, we can't be leaving animals out to be training those wolves. We need to be bringing them someplace, and the logical place, the respectful place, is going to be a composting facility. And then you're in a situation where they're worried about looters, and so they're really sensitive to any sort of gunfire, and you have to figure out, how to put these animals down. We ended up deciding to bring them back to the ranch, even though that wasn't what was fair to them, but we just could logistically not figure out how to transport their bodies, and we didn't have a relationship with the lease, with the landlord of this place that would have been appropriate. The excavator there had burned up, and so anyway, brought him home and had to put 45 down. So anyway, that was the October fires. We then continued for another week. I was going back and forth between doing structure protection, because there was still burning back around in Potter Valley. So, and it was burning towards the penstock in Potter Valley as well. And it was a little weird because I had broken my back, so I wasn't on the fire line, but I was doing structure protection on the sort of northwest corner of Potter Valley as that fire wrapped itself around. And then, like Adam says, you start getting in touch with FSA. The fire actually burned all the way back to our home ranch, and they bulldozed 3 fire lines, 7 dozers wide. Each of them are 4 miles long up to the top.
Oh my God.
And one of the dozer lines on our north corner, along between the dozer line and a 1993 control burn, the fire stopped there. But they did doze that fence line, which is now the second time a fire has stopped on our fence line. So now, if you look at the Potter Valley map of perennial landmass on some of those near-infrared type images, there's just this 2,400 acre block of living tissue, and the volunteer fire department, we joke that we need a special plan just for our place, because it's the last place to burn on that whole side. So, but one thing that happens, just like we were talking about those annual grasses, when a spark lands and your grass is standing up like that, and you have that much oxygen around, it is going to light. It's called the probability of ignition. And the probability of ignition of a perennial grass plant is 8 times less than the probability of ignition of an annual grass plant. So in those fires, on our upper range, when it was coming in on the California fescue and the geysers Melek, those sparks land, they don't light. And that's one thing I think that we can't quite study enough, because you can't send a little drone to follow that spark out into the forest and see where it lands and see that the spot fire didn't happen. But when you're getting those spot fires, that dozer line that they put in, which is 4 times wider than this room, when we lit a springtime prescribed fire the next spring, and we did this kind of sweeping fire to expand that. So we lit it on a day that the wind was kind of skimming along the dozer line, which, if you think about it from a triangle perspective, if the wind's going this way and your dozer line's that wide, your dozer line's actually that wide. So that jumped the fire line. So that on a fire day where you have really light flashy fuel wanting to burn on that side, and you have a fire coming here, unless there's an engine crew ready to chase that fire down the other side, we have to do something about the fuel load. Or we can put all the fuel brakes and the moonscapes in that we want. If the sparks are firing over and landing and igniting, it's all meaningless. So I think that we tend to kind of compartmentalize this. Oh, I've got my 100 feet, so I'm good. It's like if you have superheated fuels coming up a draw, it's going to light anything spontaneously as soon as it can find enough oxygen. You actually have sort of particles leaving, trying to find enough oxygen to then burn. And they don't burn until they find a place where there's enough oxygen. We actually know, now that we have all these annual grasses, I find the whole conversation about animal agriculture sort of irrelevant, because in an ideal world, and the seeding, when Adam and I seeded, that was pretty controversial. With the California Native Plant Society, I had a botanist up. We really weren't able to find anything interesting in the dozer line and the unseeded areas of the dozer line. And most of the places where I had parallel, where the airplane had flown through, and the airplane hadn't flown through, mostly I had Gastridium knitgrass, which is just another kind of not very interesting European grass. And we were seeding interesting European grasses. And actually Adam was seeding Elamis glaucus as well, which was awesome. I actually didn't know that until I was like, there's so much Elamis glaucus here, this is crazy. But anyway, the ranch fire, just if you guys have questions about it, but I think I already did way more than 10 minutes. The ranch fire, once again, it burned another 4,000 acre ranch of ours. But in that situation, we had actually been forced to reduce our stocking rate. And looking at the fuel load, it changed hands, and the new landowner had opinions about how it should be done, and loved the way it looked. And we've managed it for 35 years, but he didn't see the connection maybe between the management and the way the ranch was, and so thought less cows, more elk. And anyway, there was just so much feed on that ranch. We're like, we can't have cattle here in the summer. This is mean to them. This is not fair to force an animal to live in a place like this through the summer. So we pulled them off. The whole thing burned. So that worked out really well. We changed our whole grazing situation there so that so we don't have any animals over there in the summer. So that's sort of that iterative adaptation. We also are looking for and have found some leases on the coast, kind of a different ecology, different grass growing period, and also a different fire situation. So that, those animals over there I feel pretty safe about. But because we didn't have any cattle on the ranch that was burning, I was able to go down to Hopland for the river fire, and once again with a red card was able to go past the fire line and help out and find those cows and get them in a situation where they were going to be okay. They ended up being, that was it was this pyrocumulus clouds where they were flying, like they shoot up into the sky and then drop, and they bounce fire all over the place. So it was a really splotchy, I don't know if that's a word, but really just gorgeous fire. And there's even kind of patches of grass unburned and patch of grass over there unburned. And luckily, that whole getting over there ended up being more for peace of mind than the landowner, because they had a lot of gravity-fed water too. So I was able to just fix up the melted plastic, and their cattle were fine. And then we were able to go into the national forest, sort of a caravan of livestock trailers. They were able to get special permission to get through highway patrol, and we all met over at that Chevron station on Highway 20 and went up into the national forest up Horse Mountain and built a brush fence out of brush with chainsaws, and got, I don't remember how many ended up getting, maybe 70 head out, and that whole area burned maybe 2 days later or something. And that's something that the Farm Bureau is trying to do too, is get get some of these things that ended up being just the right highway patrolman knew the right, old ex-supervisor, and kind of make these things so that they're more just kind of, oh, there's a fire, let's go. So, yeah. But that's the thing is along with that list, not only are there what skills do I have to offer, but if I'm going to offer my skills, I actually need like a second level of that, of like babysitter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there's people, that's I think the tough thing about kind of I call it sometimes farming in the end times. You know, we're at 0.75% of the population farming. When I have cattle out someplace, the highway patrol don't know how to get them back in anymore. They used to get trained up on that. Everybody used to know. Neighbors are sort of terrified of the animals. So you're moving them and they're out there with their cell phone in the middle of the road. I call it farming in the end times, and without sort of the support because there's so few people that can help. And luckily, I wasn't on our ranch, so I could go help in Hopland. But we're actually going to have to make these networks bigger. There's going to have to be a fire in Butte County, and if we're going to try to save cattle, I'm going to have to go to Butte County, and somebody from Monterey is going to have to help watch my kids or something. I don't know. But we're really going to have to move around.
Just so you know, among the skills on that survey is childcare.
Oh, good.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, though. I mean, it does require. I mean, when we were doing the food recovery efforts down in Sonoma County, I mean, we were facilitating donations of food from farms all over California to the emergency evacuation kitchens that were then sending it out to first responders and evacuees. And so we needed truck drivers, we needed people to help load boxes, we needed chefs and people to clean up the dishes. And I mean, it was just like, it's all hands on deck. And I think one of the big frustrations that people felt during the fires in our neck of the woods, I'm sure in any other situation, is you're sitting there, you're watching your Facebook feed or the news headlines, and you're just seeing disaster after disaster, but you don't know what to do, right? And so if there's a way for someone to get plugged in, even if they're not, an expert volunteer firefighter or a fire ecologist or a whatever chainsaw operator, there is a role for everybody, and it's just about being able to facilitate and direct them into the right place to make sure that chainsaw operator does have somebody to watch her kid, right? So it's important stuff for sure.
It would be good to take the monetary value of all those volunteers, and then to present that to agencies for prevention work. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, this is how much we can save, by doing prevention work, all these people's labor and value.
Totally.
So we have 3 more speakers left because we are running out of time, and I want to give us a chance to have a discussion afterwards. So thank you so much, Kyle. That was very fascinating. I wanted